Good evening. Let's read some more before I'm getting too tired. It's 7:30. It's getting dark. I like to read about this old airliner. That's one you can play with in Microsoft Flight Simulator if you can find one. I have another one I'd like to read about this old airliners like Boeing 720 old one and 707, this old one there. I forgot to close my Twitter. I'm going to close it there. That's airline sim game. Another airline sim. So I need a minute to get to my bed.
McDonnell Douglas DC-10. DC-10 redirects here. For other uses, see DC-10, disambiguation. Not to be confused with McDonnell Douglas DC-X or Vickers VC-10. The McDonnell Douglas DC-10 is an American tri-J widebody aircraft manufactured by McDonnell Douglas. The DC-10 was intended to succeed the DC-8 for long-range flights. It first flew on the 29th of August, 1970. It was introduced on the 5th of August, 1971, by American Airlines. The Tri-J has two turbofans on underwing pylons and a third one at the base of the vertical stabilizer. The twin-aisle layout has a typical seating for 270 in two classes. The initial DC-10-10 had a 3,500 nautical mile, mi, 6,500 kilometers, 4,000 mi, range for transcontinental flights. The DC-10-15 had more powerful engines for hot and high airports. The DC-10-30 and 40 models, with a third main landing gear leg to support higher weights, each had intercontinental ranges of up to 5,200 mi, 9,600 kilometers, 6,000 mi. The KC-10 extender, based on the DC-10-30, is a tanker aircraft operated primarily by the United States Air Force. Early operations of the DC-10 were afflicted by its poor safety record, which was partially attributable to a design flaw in the original cargo doors that caused multiple incidents, including fatalities. Following the American Airlines Flight 191 crash, the deadliest aviation accident in U.S. history, the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, temporarily banned all DC-10s from U.S. airspace in June 1979. In August 1983, McDonnell Douglas announced that production would end due to a lack of orders, as it had widespread public apprehension after the 1979 crash and a poor fuel economy reputation. As design flaws were rectified and fleet hours increased, the DC-10 achieved a long-term safety record comparable to those of similar-era passenger jets. Production ended in 1989, with 386 delivered to airlines along with 60 KC-10 tankers. The DC-10 outsold the similar Lockheed L-1011 TriStar. It was succeeded by the lengthened, heavier McDonnell Douglas MD-11. After merging with McDonnell Douglas in 1997, Boeing upgraded many in-service DC-10s as the MD-10 with a glass cockpit that eliminated the need for a flight engineer. In February 2014, the DC-10 made its last commercial passenger flight. Cargo airlines continued to operate a small number as freighters. The Orbis Flying Eye Hospital is a DC-10 adapted for eye surgery. A few DC-10s have been converted for aerial firefighting use. Some DC-10s are on display, while other retired aircraft are in storage. Development, edit. Background, edit. Following an unsuccessful proposal for the United States Air Force's CXHLS, Heavy Logistics System, in 1965, Douglas Aircraft began design studies based on its CXHLS submission. The aviation author John H. Fielder notes that the company was under competitive pressure to produce a wide-body aircraft, having been somewhat slow in the previous decade to introduce its first jetliners. In 1966, American Airlines offered a specification to manufacturers for a wide-body aircraft smaller than the Boeing 747 yet capable of flying similar long-range routes from airports with shorter runways. This specification would be highly influential in the design of what would become the DC-10. It would become McDonnell Douglas's first commercial airliner after the merger between McDonnell Aircraft Corporation and Douglas Aircraft Company in 1967. An early DC-10 design proposal was for a 4-engine double-deck wide-body jet airliner with a maximum seating capacity of 550 passengers and similar in length to a DC-8. The proposal was shelved in favor of a tri-J single-deck wide-body airliner with a maximum seating capacity of 399 passengers, and similar in length to the DC-8 Super 60. Large portions of the detailed design work, particularly that of the fuselage, were subcontracted to external companies, such as the American aerospace company Convair. The legal relationship between McDonnell Douglas, Convair, and the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, would later serve to complicate matters. Specifically, Convair was forbidden from contacting the regulator no matter the severity of any safety concerns it had in the DC-10's design. On the 19th of February, 1968, in what was supposed to be a knockout blow to the competing Lockheed L-1011, George Spater, President of American Airlines, and James S. McDonnell of McDonnell Douglas announced American Airlines' intention to acquire the DC-10. This was a shock to Lockheed, and there was general agreement within the U.S. aviation industry that American Airlines had left its competitors at the starting gate. According to Fielder, McDonnell Douglas had been urgently pursuing the DC-10's completion in light of the prospective competition and the high financial stakes involved. Together with American Airlines' announcement of the DC-10 order, it was also reported that American Airlines had declared its intention to have the British Rolls-Royce RB211 turbofan engine on its DC-10 airliners. The DC-10 was first ordered by launch customers American Airlines with 25 orders, and United Airlines with 30 orders and 30 options in 1968. The DC-10's similarity to the Lockheed L-1011 in design, passenger capacity, and launch date resulted in a sales competition that affected the profitability of both aircraft. Into flight, edit. On the 29th of August, 1970, the first DC-10, a Series 10, conducted its maiden flight. An extensive flight test program was carried out, totaling 929 flights and 1,551 flight hours. The test program was not incident-free. During one ground test in 1970, an outwardly opening cargo door blew out and resulted rapid pressurization changes that caused the main cabin's floor to collapse. This discovery and first effort at rectification led to a contract dispute between McDonnell Douglas and Convair over what changes were necessary and financial liability. Fielder alleges that McDonnell Douglas consistently sought to minimize and postpone any design changes to the DC-10, although this attitude was not an explicit policy. In July 1971, Convair outlined the situation in a formal memo. Almost a year later, it internally expressed concerns that the inadequate resolution would lead to loss of aircraft. Tragically, the initial rectification work would prove to be inadequate. On the 29th of July 1971, the FAA issued the type certificate for the DC-10, permitting its entry into revenue service. It entered commercial service with American Airlines on the 5th of August 1971, with the initial flight being a round-trip flight between Los Angeles and Chicago. United Airlines also commenced DC-10 flights later that same month. American's DC-10s were configured to seat a maximum of 206 passengers while United's seated 222. Both had 6 across seating in first class and 8 across, 4 pairs, in coach. They operated the first version of the DC-10, referred to as the Domestic Series 10, which had a range of 3,800 miles, 3,300 mi, 6,100 kilometers, with a typical passenger load and a range of 2,710 miles, 2,350 mi, 4,360 kilometers, with maximum payload. Further development, edit. Various models of the DC-10 promptly followed, such as the Series 15, which had a typical load range of 4,350 miles, 3,718 mi, 7,000 kilometers. The Series 20 was powered by Pratt & Whitney JT9D turbofan engines, whereas the Series 10 and 30 engines were General Electric CF6. Prior to taking delivery of the aircraft, Northwest's president asked that the Series 20 aircraft be redesignated Series 40 because the airliner was much improved over the original design. The FAA issued the certification for the Series 40 on the 27th of October, 1972. In 1972, the DC-10's listed unit cost was reportedly $20 million. $146 million in 2023 prices. The Series 30 and 40 were longer-range international versions. The main visible difference between the models is that the Series 10 has 3 sets of landing gear, 1 front and 2 main, while the Series 30 and 40 have an additional centerline main gear. The center main 2-wheel landing gear, which extends from the center of the fuselage, was added to distribute the extra weight and for additional braking. The Series 30 had a typical load range of 6,220 miles, 5,410 mi, 10,010 kilometers, and a maximum payload range of 4,604 miles, 4,001 mi, 7,409 kilometers. The Series 40 had a typical load range of 5,750 miles, 5,000 mi, 9,250 kilometers, and a maximum payload range of 4,030 miles, 3,500 mi, 6,490 kilometers. The DC-10 had 2 engine options and introduced longer-range variants a few years after entering service. These allowed it to distinguish itself from its main competitor, the L1011. Further models and derivatives of the DC-10 have been considered, perhaps the most radical of these being an unpursued twin-engined model akin to the Airbus A300. However, following a spate of fatal accidents, particularly the American Airlines Flight 191 crash, the deadliest aviation accident in U.S. history. Orders for the DC-10 had nosedived by 1980, the type having garnered a poor reputation that was widespread amongst the traveling public as well as prospective operators. Competitive pressure had also played a role. Boeing in particular had developed the 747 SP variant specifically to better compete with the DC-10 and L-1011. In December 1988, the 446th and final DC-10 rolled off the Long Beach, California Products Division production line and was delivered to Nigeria Airways in July 1989. The production run had exceeded the 1971 estimate of 438 deliveries needed to break even on the program. However, according to Fielder, the DC-10 had not reached the break-even point by the end of production. As the final DC-10s were delivered, McDonnell Douglas started production of its successor, the MD-11, which was essentially a stretched derivative of the DC-10-30. In the late 1980s, international travel was on the rise thanks to lower oil prices and more economic freedom, leading to a surge in demand for wide-body airliners. However, the Boeing 747-400, MD-11, Airbus A330-340, and soon-to-be-built Boeing 777 were all behind schedule and couldn't fully meet the demand for wide-body airliners. Production of first-generation widebodies like the Boeing 747-100-200-300, L-1011, and DC-10 had already stopped, so the value of used DC-10-30s almost doubled, rising from less than $20 million to almost $40 million. Design, edit. The McDonnell Douglas DC-10 is a low-wing wide-body aircraft. It is sized to conduct medium to long-range flights, offering similar endurance to the larger Boeing 747 yet being able to use shorter runways and thus access airports that it could not. Dependent upon configuration, the main cabin can accommodate between 250 and 380 passengers across its main deck. The fuselage is split into two levels. The upper deck is the only one where passenger seating would be present, as the smaller lower level is typically used for storage for baggage and food preparation. Elevators are usually present to carry people and carts between the two levels. As originally designed, the floor of the main cabin was not strong enough to withstand full pressure differential, yet key control lines are routed through this floor, an approach that proved to be a key vulnerability. The DC-10 is a tri-J, being powered by 3 turbofan engines. 2 of these engines are mounted on pylons that attach to the bottom of the wings, while the third engine is encased in a protective banjo-shaped structure that is mounted on the top of the rear fuselage. In comparison to the first generation of jetliners, these engines generated less noise and were usually smoke-free. The engines are equipped with thrust reversers which reduce the distance required when landing. Despite being considerably larger, the landing speed of the DC-10 was comparable to that of the contemporary Boeing 727. The primary flight controls of the DC-10 consist of inboard and outboard ailerons, 2-section elevators, and a 2-section rudder. The secondary flight controls comprise leading edge slats, spoilers, and a dual-rate movable horizontal stabilizer. The vertical stabilizer with the rudder is mounted on top of the tail engine banjo, while the horizontal stabilizer with its 4-segment elevator is attached to the sides of the rear fuselage conventionally. The DC-10 is equipped with retractable tricycle landing gear. To enable higher gross weights, the later 30 and 40 series have an additional 2-wheel main landing gear, which retracts into the center of the fuselage. The DC-10 is capable of performing all-weather operations, a function that many preceding jetliners had been incapable of. From the onset, it could perform takeoffs and landings completely under autopilot. Cassette tapes were used to load pre-programmed flight plans into the flight computer. As originally built, the cockpit was operated by a flight crew of 3. Numerous DC-10s have received a retrofitted glass cockpit and the advanced common flight deck shared with the MD-11, thus eliminating the flight engineer and permitting the aircraft, redesignated MD-10, to be flown by a flight crew of 2. A total of 4 independent hydraulic systems are present. The flight controls actuate many of the flight control surfaces across the airliner via these hydraulic circuits. The critical nature of these circuits and their vulnerability to damage in the tail area led to the addition of hydraulic fuses to prevent the total loss of fluid. Power for the hydraulics was derived from primary and reserve engine-driven pumps equipped on each of the 3 engines. Hydraulic power was required for flight control. There was no provision for reverting to manual flight control inputs. Variants, edit. Original variants, edit. DC-10-10. The DC-10-10 is the initial passenger version introduced in 1971, produced from 1970 to 1981. The DC-10-10 was equipped with GE CF6-6 engines, which was the first civil engine version from the CF6 family. A total of 122 were built. DC-10-10CF. The 10CF is a convertible passenger and cargo transport version of the 10. 8 were delivered to Continental Airlines and 1 to United Airlines. DC-10-15. The 15 variant was designed for use at hot and high airports. The Series 15 is basically a 10 fitted with higher thrust GE CF650C2F, derated DC-10-30 engines, power plants. The 15 was first ordered in 1979 by Mexicana and Aeromexico. 7 were completed between 1981 and 1983. Long-range variants, edit. DC-10-30. A long-range model and the most common model produced. It was built with General Electric CF6-50 turbofan engines, with larger fuel tanks and a larger wingspan to increase range and fuel efficiency, and with a set of rear center landing gear to support the increased weight. It was very popular with European flag carriers. A total of 163 were built from 1972 to 1988 and delivered to 38 different customers. The model was first delivered to KLM and Swissair on the 21st of November, 1972, and first introduced in service on the 15th of December, 1972, by the latter. DC-10-30CF. The convertible cargo forward/passenger transport version of the DC-10-30. The first deliveries were to Overseas National Airways, ONA, and Trans-International Airlines in 1973. A total of 27 were built. DC-10-30A. The extended range version of the DC-10-30. The 30A aircraft has a higher maximum takeoff weight of 590,000 pounds, 270 t, is powered by 3 GE CF650C2B engines each producing 54,000 lbf, 240 kN, of thrust, and is equipped with an additional fuel tank in the rear cargo hold. It has an additional 700 mi of range to 6,600 mi. 5,713 mi, 10,620 kilometers. The first of this variant was delivered to Finnair in 1981. A total of 6 were built and 5 30s were later converted to 30as. DC-10-30F. Also known as the DC-10-30F. This was the all-freight version of the 30. Production was to start in 1979, but Alitalia did not confirm its order then. Production began in May 1984 after the first aircraft order from FedEx. A total of 10 were built. DC-10-40. The first long-range version fitted with Pratt & Whitney JT9D engines. Originally designated DC-10-20, this model was renamed DC-10-40 after a special request from Northwest Orient Airlines. The aircraft was much improved compared to its original design, with a higher MTO, on par with the Series 30, and with more powerful engines, and retains the increased wingspan from the DC-10-30. The airline's president wanted to advertise that he had the latest version. The company also wanted its aircraft to be equipped with the same engines as its Boeing 747s for fleet commonality. Northwest Orient Airlines and Japan Airlines were the only airlines to order the Series 40, respectively ordering 22 and 20 aircraft. The Northwest DC-10-40s were delivered with improved engines, Pratt & Whitney JT9D20 engines producing 50,000 lbf, 220 kN, of thrust and a MTO of 555,000 pounds, 252 t. The DC-10-40s delivered to Japan Airlines were equipped with P&W JT9D59er engines that produced a thrust of 53,000 lbf, 240 kN, and a MTO of 565,000 pounds, 256 t. 42 DC-10-40s were built from 1973 to 1983. Externally, the DC-10-40 can be distinguished from the DC-10-30 by a slight bulge near the front of the nacelle for the #2 tail engine. Proposed variants, edit. DC-10-20, edit. A proposed version of the DC-10-10 with extra fuel tanks, 3 feet, 91 centimeters, extensions on each wingtip, and a rear center landing gear. It was to use Pratt & Whitney JT9D15 turbofan engines, each producing 45,500 lbf, 202 kN, of thrust, with a maximum takeoff weight of 530,000 pounds, 240 t. However, engine improvements led to increased thrust and increased takeoff weight. Northwest Orient Airlines, one of the launch customers for this longer-range DC-10, requested the name change to DC-10-40. DC-10-50, edit. A proposed version with Rolls-Royce RB211-524 engines for British Airways. The order never came and the plans for the DC-10-50 were abandoned after British Airways ordered the Lockheed L1011-500 instead. DC-10 Twin, edit. Beginning in 1966, 2 engine designs were studied for the DC-10 before the design settled on the 3-engine configuration. Later, a big twin based on the DC-10 cross-section was proposed to Airbus as a 50-50 venture but was rejected. Then in 1971, a shortened DC-10 version with 2 engines was proposed as a competitor to the Airbus A300. McDonnell Douglas held a major presentation of the proposed DC-10 twin at Long Beach, and several European airlines were willing to place orders. However, on the 30th of July 1973, MDC's board decided not to give the proposed twin the go-ahead, as no U.S. airline had ordered it. Later, more DC-10 twin proposals were made, either as a collaboration with a European manufacturer or as a solely McDonnell Douglas product, but none proceeded beyond design studies. Tanker versions, edit. The KC-10 extender is a military version of the DC-10-30CF for aerial refueling. The aircraft was ordered by the U.S. Air Force and delivered from 1981 to 1988. A total of 60 were built. These aircraft are powered exclusively by General Electric CF6 turbofan engines. The DC-10 was an aerial refueling tanker for the Royal Netherlands Air Force. These were converted from civil airliners, DC-10-30CF, to a similar standard as the KC-10. Also, commercial refueling companies Omega Aerial Refueling Services and